I think there's 100 million Americans across the country right now who lack access to the basic communications platforms that help them understand the world, that help them communicate with one another, that help them share their story, that help them shape a future. And when you say that number, 100 million, I mean, we are doing massive amounts of work to mobilize them, no doubt, but the potential to mobilize even more people is there.
I'm so happy to be up here for this introduction because when Chicagoans get together and start talking about politics, inevitably people express excitement and relief that we have Toni Preckwinkle as Cook County Board President. She has single-handedly restored faith in the political process of thousands of Chicagoans, and we're really delighted to have her with us here today. Her life work rests on core principles of independence, transparency, and accountability. During 19 years as a Chicago alderman, she ended the old patronage model in her ward that awarded jobs based on political clout. She sponsored the living wage and affordable housing ordinances and was a lead plaintiff in a lawsuit to institute a more racially equitable map of Chicago's ward boundaries. During her last 10 years as alderman, she produced a program on CAN TV, bringing in constituents, local organizations, civic leaders, and local businesses from the 4th Ward. On the City Council, she opposed any attempts to erode safeguards for the public's channels, seeking equity, diversity, and parity as a part of cable franchises in Chicago. When running for election in 2010, she'd come into CAN TV to do a show much the way I expect she went all over the county. No handlers, no entourage, just a direct, people-to-people, boots on the ground, no holes barred commitment to getting the job done and doing the right thing for the people of Cook County. Voters elected her by a landslide with more excitement than we've felt about Cook County leadership in a long, long time. Toni Preckwinkle knows the power and importance of preserving the people's access to media. It's an honor to have her with us today, and I hope you'll join me in giving a warm welcome to Cook County President Toni Preckwinkle. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm a teacher by profession. Let's try that again. Good afternoon. All right. I want to welcome everybody to Chicago and to Cook County. Cook County is actually the second largest county in the country after Los Angeles. We have 5.3 million people. I'm glad to see so many of you here today dedicated to community media. I'm a history teacher by profession, and I always used to tell my students at the beginning of our American history class that democracy was at the same time the best and the most fragile form of government on earth. The best and the most fragile, for the same reason. It depended on an active, engaged citizenry. And that's the importance of public, educational, and government access centers. They continue to provide a unique opportunity for participation from local residents, educational institutions, not-for-profits, and government agencies, many of whom are shut out of other opportunities or channels. In Chicago, studies have shown that 40% of our people, 40%, have limited or no access to the internet due to cost barriers, lack of interest, or lack of access. That's 40%. So for many in Chicago, public access television, like CAN TV, continues as a resource engaging our diverse neighborhoods and communities. We, especially those of us in public office, need to understand the impact of public access channels on our communities. These local access channels provide primarily local content and a unique forum to discuss and engage, generating ideas and dialogue. I continue to participate in public access shows because I know that for many of our residents, this is the best and perhaps the only way in which they'll hear directly about what Cook County government is doing. Before I was Cook County Board President, as Barbara said, I had a show, Fourth Ward Report, as alderman. During my time as alderman, I worked with CAN-TV to produce this program, and it was a chance to invite individuals and experts to discuss the issues that were relevant to the people of my ward. In Cook County, we have a public access channel, Channel 900, on which we produce and air our public meetings, announcements, and informational segments. One of our goals is to continue to grow and expand our county access channel. Public access channels bring issues and people together that might not ordinarily bump into each other, even though they live side by side. That's what's great about community media. We aren't just getting the news, we're engaging with our communities and building trusted relationships. I want to thank all of you for the good work that you do strengthening our democracy, because surely public access media is part of that citizen engagement that makes our democracy vibrant. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference, and for all of you who are from out of town, I hope you'll take the opportunity to really enjoy our city. I warn you though, I came here when I was 18 years old to go to college, and I've never left, so thank you.
Thank you, President Preckwinkle. I would now like to ask that our closing plenary panelists please take the stage. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our outstanding public policy plenary panel this afternoon, the President and CEO of Free Press, Craig Aaron. Craig took the leadership of Free Press and the Free Press Action Fund in April of 2011. He joined Free Press in 2004 and speaks across the country on media, internet, and journalism issues. Craig is a frequent guest on talk radio and is quoted often in the national press. His commentaries also appear regularly in The Guardian and the Huffington Post. Before joining Free Press, he was an investigative reporter for Public Citizens Congress Watch and the managing editor of In These Times magazine. He's the editor of 2 books, Appeal to Reason, 25 Years in These Times, and Changing Media, Public Interest Policies for the Digital Age. He's a graduate of Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Please welcome Craig Aaron.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I see we have an overflow crowd, but tables going down in the back. Which is great to see. Well, thank you for the introduction and especially for the invitation. I think congratulations are in order. This has been a really great conference. To the organizers, you're almost done. But I hope you enjoy this. It's great to be at an event with so much participation. Every panel I went to was absolutely packed, lots of good questions, and I hope that this closing plenary and panel won't be any exception, and we're going to definitely try to leave some time for your questions and comments here toward the end. You know, people have been so gracious all weekend, and they keep thanking me for being here, which is really totally unnecessary, because it's really truly a privilege to be with this group, because there wouldn't be a media reform movement, there wouldn't be a media justice movement without the pioneering work done by people like George Stoney, and without the work still being done every day by the people in this community and the people in this room. So you really have here the backbone of this movement, of this growing movement for a better media and a stronger democracy. And so I just want to start by thanking you for what you do every day and thanking you for making the trip to be here. For those who don't know Free Press or don't know what I do, we started our organization almost 10 years ago because we believed that progress on any issue that matters would be impossible without better media. And we believe that ultimately the only way we're going to get that better media is through changing media policies. And so we've tried to build an organization that works partly on the inside with lawyers and lobbyists and researchers in Washington who walk the halls of power and who pay attention to what's hiding in the footnotes at places like the Federal Communications Commission. But whatever power we've managed to build most certainly does not come from inside the Beltway. It comes from collaborating with this network of grassroots allies all across the country, and it comes from a base of 500,000 activists who we try to mobilize to take action, online and off, signing petitions, calling Congress, visiting policymakers, holding public hearings, and sometimes, when necessary, taking to the streets. And we've found that our members all across the country are passionate advocates and consumers of public and community media. And so it's become a major priority for us, and also an opportunity for us to figure out how we can be a better and stronger ally. I'm here today with this esteemed panel, and we're going to talk about national policy and the real world. And these are not ideas that you usually see really connected, policy and the real world. They're pretty far apart. And I hope in today's discussion we can bring them just a little bit closer together. You know, the way I see it, the problem we have isn't really a lack of good policy ideas, because we know more or less what we should do to support local media, to connect everyone to the internet, to give communities the information they need. I know Steve Waldman, formerly of the FCC, addressed this gathering a year ago, and in that document, the FCC's Future of Media report, it's full of ideas, and it's full of praise for community media and its untapped potential. But a year later, too many of those ideas are still stuck on paper. So, you know, when we look at where our problems are, including my pages sticking together, the problem isn't a lack of ideas, and I don't really think the problem is a lack of money either, because the money is out there, it's just being spent on other things. It's being spent on tax breaks for the rich, it's being spent on special favors for our good friends at the cable companies. And our problem isn't public support, because I saw this chart yesterday that Barbara Popovich had in her presentation showing that people were willing to pay 4 times as much on their monthly bills for quality local programming as they were for things like ESPN or the Sci-Fi Channel. And we know there are tens and tens of millions of people out there who care passionately about public and community media. The public media folks say there's 170 million of them. There are 6 million people out there who financially support their public and community media outlets, and these people vote. So why aren't we winning? I think the biggest obstacle we face is, when it comes to reimagining and reinvigorating community media in America, is really all about political will. That what we have ultimately is an organizing problem, and that often we vastly underestimate just how much power we really have, just how much power we could have. We don't know our audience well enough, and we don't know when the right time is to ask them to stand up for us. And we don't always recognize who our allies could be. And to be fair, they don't always recognize us. And we get too lost in the turf battles and embittered from fighting over table scraps. And we fail to see how collectively, with this broad coalition of groups and organizations focusing on what they do best, we could truly be greater than the sum of our parts. So I think it's time that we thought about how can we take advantage of those political opportunities that are right in front of us. I mean, how many times are there elected officials in your community media centers? How many times do you have them on camera? And how many times do you use those opportunities to plead your own cause? I suspect it's not enough. And at conferences like this, we talk a lot about innovation. We talk about investing in technology. We talk about blogs and tweets and widgets. We talk about new fundraising approaches and management theories. And all of those things are incredibly important. But increasingly, what I think we need to be talking about, and what I think our panel is going to be talking about, is how we're going to innovate our approach to politics. And for me, I think that starts with telling a different story about community media. Because we have something of a storytelling problem, which In some ways, it's a little surprising to me because I know this room is filled with amazing storytellers, and amazing storytellers with technical chops. And we need to start using those skills to tell this new story about community media, what it really does, why it really matters, and as Gordon Quinn suggested in his remarks yesterday, why the future of our democracy depends on it. To help answer those questions, help solve these problems, and perhaps to correct where I've gone wrong, we've got this great panel here. Dan Coughlin is here. He's been called a community media visionary by me just now. But I think it's true. I think it's true. And as most of you know, Dan leads the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Paul Jaguar, I got it, Jaguar, yes. He's here, and he is the president and CEO of the Connecticut Public Affairs Network and president of the National Association of Public Affairs Networks, or NAPAN, which I'm going to try to be the last acronym I use up here today. So we'll try to do that. And my good friend Amalia Deloney is here. Amalia is the associate director of the Center for Media Justice and the Media Action Grassroots Network. She's a policy expert and an incredible community organizer, a relatively recent transplant to Chicagoland after a long time working in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. So I'm going to try to throw out a couple questions to the panel. Hopefully they'll challenge each other, and then we will do our best to open it up to the floor. Dan, I'm going to start with you. And I know you have a video, which hopefully my question will do something to lead into. And so let's start with this. You know, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? You just finished a monumental franchise renegotiation, and I'm curious about, through that process, you know, what you've learned that might make sense sharing with everybody else in how we approach politics and politicians.
Thanks, Craig, and it's so great to have Free Press here with us today, and the Center for Media Justice, as well as Paul from NAPAN. These kind of coalitions and organizations that are going to make our movement stronger and lead us to, I think, a much more brighter future. And it's been great actually being here this week to hear so many different positive stories. I know we still have a challenging environment, but certainly in Chicago with their franchise renewal, the leadership of Barbara, what's happened in New York City. I know we have our colleagues from Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan. We had a very successful franchise renewal. So there are some victories, and it is, I think, a time where we can finally see the tide is turning around public access and that movement. And I'm very happy to be hearing those different stories. And one of the key elements in all of those stories, from Portland to Chicago to New York, and what we just saw here being addressed by the president of the Cook County Commissioners, is this strengthening of a relationship between our elected officials and community media throughout the country. And that is key. And as part of that, making these policy issues that you're dealing with, Greg, in Washington, real on the ground in the communities that we serve. And as part of that, I just want to show a little video of something of a little thing we were doing in New York, in Manhattan, that exemplifies exactly what Craig and so many others have been doing, which is really making sure that the policy that we fight for and the franchising operations that we engage in actually have a real-world effect on the day-to-day lives of the people that we serve. Free, independent media is the oxygen of democracy.
When they said that they were going to reopen this firehouse, I was trying to imagine walking down 104th Street, waiting for galloping horses to come out of here to put out a fire.
A sign of resurgence and development. It's a sign of jobs. And we like this kind of construction particularly because it's adaptively reused, it's preserving the best of the city's architecture and history, and the more of that, the better.
but really this is an ability to transform the lives of our young people. There is that digital divide, which is very real. This provides access to broadband, digital production studio, knowing how to utilize those skills to be able to make a living, but really to represent our community through the eyes of community members.
I mean, I like being on the camera, but I like to be behind the camera.
Media production is a lot of fun. It's very exciting.
And this has been a long road towards getting to the imminent opening of the MNN Firehouse Studio. So we're excited about it because, as everyone knows, MNN provides local broadcasting for communities. So having access to community-driven programming that we know will be widely displayed and viewed by our communities is so important.
To have this studio, this new production studio right here in East Harlem, in El Barrio, just showcases that this community is continuing to reinvent itself and create the kind of climate that encourages business development, helps our young people, and gets us all into the digital age.
This is a really big day for East Harlem because having MNN here in the middle of what I believe is the cultural center of New York City gives us another opportunity, gives the cultural sector another opportunity to really showcase all of the great work that we have. And MNN is a great vehicle for that.
The youth channel is here, that there's a real focus on developing those skills amongst young people to allow them to be critical thinkers, to allow them to present their issues through the lens of their lens and their reality is something that I really look forward to. Letting them understand that they have a role to play in solving the problems of our neighborhood, of our community, of our society. That really is the future that I see with this firehouse, is that wonderful partnership with this community as a whole.
The MNN Community Center, a place of education and learning, of creativity and inspiration, and of commitment and collaboration.
Video now is a way that people are communicating all over the world. So that makes it more important than ever that we all have access to that means of video production. That communities, especially communities that have not always had access to this kind of resource, are getting their foot in the door and have access to it. And that's why it's so important that MNN and other groups like it are out there making this kind of equipment and this kind of knowledge accessible to groups throughout the city.
The conversion of the old firehouse here on East 104th Street into Manhattan Neighborhood Network's new media center comes during a time of change here in East Harlem. For the advocates of free expression, it's a time of opportunity. For eHarlem TV, I'm Fred Noriega. For more information, please visit the Manhattan Neighborhood Network's website at www.mnn.org.
Just to follow up, Craig, did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Good, okay. But there you see something very important, and which we saw in the opening remarks of the Cook County president. The relationship that exists in each of your centers, in our center in Manhattan and Brooklyn, with local elected officials. That is an important and powerful relationship that we can and we must leverage much better in the years ahead. And I think from a national perspective, if we approach our issues from the perspective of mapping our PEG centers, matching our PEG centers to our nationally elected representatives, and then mobilizing them at a national level to enact the right policies, map, match, and mobilize, we together can be unstoppable and will be unstoppable. And it's happening slowly, and we see cracks in the power of AT&T and Verizon around the country, and those cracks are going to grow wider as we become more organized and more mobilized.
All right, thanks, Dan. So, Paul, I want to bring you into the conversation here, and obviously you're doing a lot of dealing with state elected officials, and as well as federal officials. I mean, the state spans were really held up as a model in that FCC Future of Media report, and I'm curious, with all of that attention, you know, what has changed? has that been helpful? And, what have you learned as you sort of gone on this professional journey, I think with your roots really here in the access community into what you're doing now? Connect those dots for us.
I think I would like to start with that story because, one of the things that you mentioned is that you really do need to tell that story. And there's a really great story that is so relevant to the people in this room. When I came out of high school, I wanted to give something back to my community, so I joined the fire department. And on September 29th, 1984, our department was called to a scene of a horrific car crash where this young woman was hit by a drunk driver. And as we worked to extricate her from this car, it took more than an hour for us to do this. And I had one of those moments where, as we're struggling to save this woman's life, I had that sense where this could happen to me. It was a moment that changed my entire life. It changed the perspective of who I was as a person. And I thought, if other people could experience the same thing that I did, maybe we could make some change. It just so happened that someone was videotaping that extrication, and we used that video. And the first thing I did was I went to my local access center, and I learned how to shoot, and I learned how to edit. And from that, created a documentary on drunk driving. It took me 3 years. It actually turned out much larger than I had ever anticipated. It ended up being a co-production with West Hartford Community Television, which I'm very proud of their award last night, and Connecticut Public Television. It was funded by Aetna, nominated for a couple of national awards. And it was, I tell that story because, you're all involved in your access centers, and you never know what the connection's going to be that will create something larger than that. During that time period, I realized that I was so underprepared to operate in a democracy. I didn't know who my state representative was. I didn't know that I could testify. I didn't understand the system because I had never been exposed to it. So we started a pilot project in West Hartford where we would go to the legislature and videotape 2 hours a day, and we distribute the tapes statewide. And each year that project grew bigger and bigger. So we got to the point where in 1997, I left West Hartford, created a nonprofit called the Connecticut Public Affairs Network, and researched how other states were doing it, found a model in the state of Washington that made huge sense for us, televised all 3 branches of government, gavel-to-gavel coverage, just like C-SPAN. They cover public policy discussions happening all around the state. And I took that model, brought it back to Connecticut, and we launched the Connecticut Network in 1998. We've been on the air ever since. We're statewide on expanded basic cable. We are on UVerse on channel 83, which is very nice. We stream on multiple streams on the internet, record everything in on-demand files. And then when Steve Waldman, when the Future of Media report came out, I attended one of the hearings in Washington, D.C., and I was amazed that they had no idea that we existed. At that point, there were probably 8 networks like us around the country that had grown to the evolution of covering all 3 branches: independent governance, nonprofit corporation. And so I pulled Steve aside at the lunch break, and I said, "You need to hear what we're doing here." The thing that he was most interested in was the election coverage that we were providing. The coverage of those debates and campaign appearances and things like that provide the tools for people to make educated choices. So when the report came out, we filed all sorts of information about the successes that we were having in the states, and we were very pleased when the FCC came out and said that every state should have a state version of C-SPAN. From that very small beginning in West Hartford Community Television, we now have a national movement where we're trying to create these centers where people can better understand that in a democracy, we all have a role to play. And by being exposed to the process on a daily basis, when you're flipping through the channels or visiting us on the web, you understand that, hey, those people are just like me. They're testifying. It's okay to talk to your legislators. And oh, by the way, that's my legislator. Maybe I should send him a note. And so it really has grown to the point where the success of what we're trying to accomplish in the days when so many State House reporters have been let go it is more important now than ever before. Did I answer your question?
I think you did. I mean, I think my follow-up is, based on that experience and starting in the Access Center and turning into this new thing, now if we sort of go back and you know, we have all these great media centers. Some of them may have an organization in their state. I imagine most don't, doing what you do. Where are the opportunities for collaboration? That's the theme of our whole event here, collaborate. And it seems like there's something here where, you know, if we play our cards right, we don't have to just fight against each other over scarce resources, where there could be some collective, some sharing. What do you see based on your experience that could really open the door to those opportunities?
The vision for me, and you might expect, it's pretty closely aligned with the G of the PEG. But can you imagine the power of having a state public affairs network in every state that also has a relationship with the local government channels in the communities, so that when things are happening on the state level that impact that community, there's a sharing opportunity. And when things are happening on the local level that impact the state, there's a sharing opportunity. Incredibly empowering for ordinary people to be able to participate in that process and to learn. You know, one of the things that is so important in all of this is demystifying the process. And, you know, we go to extremes to put a lot of explanatory graphics up. State legislatures tend to use a lot of jargon. Bill information, how to find the actual text of bills, and the plain language of those bills is very important. There is an opportunity here. Certainly, we talked about the potential for the Cable Act to be rewritten over the next year or a couple of years moving into the future, however long that takes. There's an opportunity for us to re-envision this a little bit and see if we can put those linkages in place so that in the end, the power of the access to what's happening in state government and local governments is fluid.
Okay. So Amalia, I want to sort of bring that back down to the grassroots level and hope you can shed some light on the importance you see in your organizing work of media work. And so maybe through the prism of your own experience, but also talking about how that is expanded into this, you know, incredible nationwide network of more than 140 organizations really committed to media justice and really paying attention to media policy, but truly from the ground up.
Great. So in the spirit of storytelling, because everyone seems to be doing that today, I wanted to start with just an introduction to sort of how I came to community media. Because I came to community media as an organizer, and I came to policy, in fact, as an organizer. I think that I identify as an organizer much more than I do so as a policy head or anything else like that, because I think it speaks to a relationship to power and a vision for change that's much more holistic than just sort of incremental battles. It's about a vision for a quality of life, community health and well-being that touches on all kinds of different areas. So I first came to community media kind of late, admittedly. It was 2006. Many of you will remember that during that year, at that point in time, we experienced in 6 states the largest immigration raid ever. 6 SWIFT plants or meatpacking plants in 6 different states were all raided early morning, 5 in the morning, in an operation that ICE at that point in time called Operation Wagon Train. The idea was that there were undocumented folks that were working in these plants. They were using IDs that were illicit, and the raids were meant to capture these folks. At the time I was working at the Main Street Project. It was an organization based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but that worked throughout the state of Minnesota and in fact 3 other states, Idaho, Oregon, and Iowa, really working in meatpacking plants with rural Latino communities. In the aftermath of the raid, you know, beyond sort of all the immediate trauma community members faced, there were 2 things that became very clear to us as organizers. One, we had no control over the media. So the story, almost immediately as it was happening, wasn't told from our perspective. It was told by other people's perspectives. So labels and stereotypes abounded. But more importantly, we realized that in these communities, folks had a real visceral experience that they wanted to both archive and that they wanted to share. So part of, you know, what we tried to do after these raids was help people use a digital storytelling process as a part of healing. So this idea of storytelling both as a form of healing, but storytelling as a form of organizing. And in reflecting on that, that particular moment and working in rural communities, we knew a couple things. Like, we knew how to organize, we knew how to do storytelling, we knew how to deal with community members and trauma, we knew how to value healing. What we didn't have, though, was the infrastructure to be able to do the storytelling. We didn't have the money to bring a digital lab to these different communities. We didn't have the technical expertise to upload tons of video footage to help people do all of the editing. We had very basic infrastructure. And so we partnered at that point in time with local access stations, because what they had was equipment, what they had was a platform, and what they had was an accessible space. And I think when I look back at that moment, it crystallizes for me so many of the ways I think that organizers both have come to community media and have the potential to come to community media. We have the people. We have the goals or the fights that we're trying to put forward, but we have them in a way that are deep personal relationships with individuals and communities. And what we lack in some ways is sort of the infrastructure that's the brick and mortar infrastructure. And I think that that's what community media centers can offer, is this brick and mortar. Much more, but brick and mortar is a place to start. And I think the reality is that it takes both sides of that sort of spectrum to come together. We need the organizers and the justice folks who are deeply embedded in communities, but we also need the community media centers that have the infrastructure, and together we can sort of knit them together for the social change. I think to the second part of your question, Craig, what does this mean for Magnet? I would totally be remiss if I didn't do a shout out to all the Magnet members who are here. So these are the ones I've seen. Gretchen, where are you? Antoine, Steve, Rainieri, are you here? Sean McLaughlin, Mike Wassenaar, I saw you somewhere. Danielle from Prometheus. These are just some of the more than 140 organizations that make up the Media Action Grassroots Network. We're in 27 cities across the country. We're a local-to-local network that's really bringing together community-based organizations who are fighting for social and economic justice, but understand that media policy is part of what the sort of victory solution looks like nowadays. I think what I would leave people with before we sort of go on to the next point is that for us, we have always, and we continue to struggle with this idea of how do we make the fight that we're engaged in one that is about material conditions that change for community members. So I oftentimes quote Amilcar Cabral. I don't know if people know him. But he has a famous quote about always bearing in mind that people are fighting for more than ideas. They're fighting to make a better life for their children. And I think that that's what we often experience with community members, is that if you bring them in around a policy fight that's very wonky and very esoteric, it's hard for people to invest. If you bring them in a way that they feel like this is about increasing the community health and well-being in the area where they live, that this is fundamentally tied to educational attainment, health, jobs, living wages, community safety, all of these other things that are actual tangible material benefits, I think that what you'll find is that you have a huge base of people in all these communities across the country who are more than willing to get involved, but need a place where they feel like they're starting with a story that they understand, which is the story of their life and what they want for their families.
All right, thank you for that. I'm curious, I guess I have a question for the room, make this a little more interactive, and I'm curious for all of those of you out there, how many at your local channel or community media center have an existing partnership with another kind of community media outlet, an LPFM, a community radio station, or perhaps a public media outlet, a PBS and NPR, who's got active partnerships that are mostly working? Okay, so we'll call that 15%. So it seems like there's some missed opportunities there. And I'm wondering from the panel how we might break down some of those barriers and silos across this whole universe of public media. And certainly I understand that it's not necessarily the folks in this room that have built up those walls. But I'm curious what we might do to collectively, ultimately we have shared goals, non-commercial media, serving local communities, providing information to those communities. Where are some of the openings?
Maybe I'll just jump in here, Craig, because unfortunately my time is limited. I'm going to be rude in a minute and jump out and leave. But I think one of the, there are these silos that are often created primarily because of regulatory issues often. But I think we've heard here this last few days and from Free Press recently are, the beginnings of a new vision, seeing all of these various community media initiatives, community radio, community television, PEG TV, even CPB, PBS, NPR, as part of a broader movement, of a public media movement, and that we can no longer see ourselves as separated from each other, but rather as part of a movement that puts the public interest first, which is very different than commercial media, as we know, and that truly values information in a democracy and the diversity of information in a democracy. And if we can develop a vision around public media and a way of making it sustainable tied to that vision, whether that may be, automatic public interest set-asides on any kind of media, whether using the spectrum or public rights-of-way or the post office, then we could start to get into to build that unity and that collaboration, as well as what's happening on the ground. And before I leave, I just want to also mention and acknowledge George Stoney and his vision, which I think informs all of us, all of our work. And in particular, I know George loved the ACM, and so many of us are so happy about the great work that the ACM folks did here today. And I also want to say, in honor of George and recognizing the great work here today, that MNN will make a contribution of $10,000 in George's memory for the fantastic work that the ACM is going to be doing. So. Support that. So I think, Craig, the work that you're doing, the vision that you're bringing to Free Press, the way that you're reaching out to public media as a whole, and trying to bring everybody together under a unified vision is so important and so critical, and hopefully we can move that forward.
Well, thanks for that, Dan. I know you're going to have to run, and that'll probably make it easier for me as a moderator. I did want to give I think we maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions from the floor, or maybe we could take 3 real quick, and then the panel could respond. So is there anybody dying to ask something? I've got a whole list if not. So stand up if you have a question. No questions. Okay, well, let's keep going. Okay, I want to talk about, are we celebrating our victories enough? It feels like, it's so hard when you do this work. It's a long-term process. Sausage making by its very nature is just ugly and depressing, and I know that's not probably the new tagline at a network, but so maybe I've got it wrong. But it feels like in the broader community, we actually have a lot to be really excited about. I mean, we've seen, low power FM radio, a 10-year fight, the potential to create thousands of new radio stations this year. That seems like a tremendous opportunity. We've seen, big companies, AT&T, who a lot of you are wrangling with on the other side of the equation, but look, their merger was stopped. We saw 10 million people mobilize in January against the Stop Online Piracy Act. These relatively obscure but incredibly important pieces of legislation. What can we take from that going forward to really move the agenda and move the priorities of a lot of the folks in this room to get the support they need and to really clear the way up against often a real challenging environment and very powerful corporations who are frankly not always on their side. What can we learn from that, and how do we translate that into this work?
One suggestion, when we talk about the power within the corporations, certainly it's no secret that one of the groups that they listen to is the politicians themselves. And as Craig had mentioned, you all have your local state reps, senators that come in, your congressmen that come in. You have an opportunity to talk with them about it. One of the things that NAPAN is doing is, coming out of the Steve Waldman report, we realized that we have a really great opportunity here, but we're just not quite able to get our act together. And we have this nice thick report. Somewhere buried in that nice thick report says every state should have a state version of C-SPAN. So what we did was we took that report and we boiled it down to 3 sheets of paper. Bullets are great, and it was mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday. Color is also great. and basically something that you can hand someone and say, this is the issue. Here it is. It's in one sheet of paper, and it's easily recognized, and it has a call to action. Now, with these pieces of paper, been very successful over the last few months of getting those politicians who really need to understand this to come to the table. And once you understand this, it actually gets a little bit easier. There are groups of state legislatures, like, for example, there's the Council for State Governments. There's the National Conference of State Legislatures. And these bodies represent all of the legislators, either in CSG's case is all three branches, and CSL is just the legislature. We presented to them information like this with a very simple resolution that we asked them to pass. CSG took up that resolution in May and passed it unanimously. Last month, the National Association of Secretaries of States did the same thing. Next week, NCSL is meeting here in Chicago, and they will be taking up that resolution in support. And basically, the whole premise here is, what the resolution says is, we think this is a good idea. And then with that show of support, you then move to the next level, and you go back to those cable companies, you go back to the FCC and say, we have something here, you need to take a look at this. And then that develops into the plan. So, I guess if there is an example there of building the support that you need to send a very strong message, and it really starts with very simple messaging.
So maybe three quick things. I know it said in my bio that I was born in Guatemala, and that is true. I'm also just coming back from a vacation or a trip home. And so I think I have in my mind right now this idea about corporations and the role they play in our lives. For many of us, it's something that we live with all the time. And in fact, it was a good reminder for me to be home in Guatemala to remind me that my life in the United States and the fact that I cannot permanently go back to Guatemala is in large part due to corporations and the overreach that they've had in our lives. While I was in Guatemala, I was also reading Joe Torres's book. I finished it, News for All the People, and I got to chapter 16, which is largely about PEG. And I was reminded as I was reading it that then as now, we have been and we continue to be sold this ideology that promotes corporations as the agents of democracy, and they are in fact not. And that's sort of what people are realizing. It's a starting point for many people. And in fact, I think there's 100 million Americans across the country right now who lack access to the basic communications platforms that help them understand the world, that help them communicate with one another, that help them share their story, that help them shape a future. And when you say that number, 100 million, I mean, we are doing massive amounts of work to mobilize them, no doubt, but the potential to mobilize even more people is there. And I think that one of the things that we've been realizing is that, in today's day and age, with this communications platform largely being the internet, what we're experiencing is a digital divide that has always been there, but in many ways is exacerbated or felt in ways that are just far more caustic than they were before. And so I know that here at the conference there's been a lot of conversation about old media and new media, and I know I'm in a room with friends who feel like that's a false choice. We're dealing with a media system that has been broken for a long time, and that we're dealing with sort of a hyper level of exclusion that really entrenches and exacerbates pre-existing economic and racial disparities. And while that can sound depressing, I think it also presents an opportunity to engage people, because it's that moment where people really, again, feel like their life has the potential to change when they get involved that really draws people in. And so to kind of piggyback on what Craig was saying, we've had some major victories that I think people are celebrating, but I also think that there's some tremendous opportunities for community media to join with all the other sort of media justice and media policy work that's going on. You all service everyday content producers, people who want to be able to tell their own stories in their own words, who for some people may not naturally come to the language of things like self-determination and cultural sovereignty, but that's what you're talking about. And this is what it means to create healthy and well communities when you use your stories and your life experience to do that. And if you're a content producer, there are many things that are on the horizon that we need to be thinking about. You know, CISPA is part of it, the Cybersecurity Act that happened, SOPA, Craig mentioned, you know, municipal broadband preemptions that are happening. All of these things in one way or another have roots that have touched the PEG community for many years. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons and wisdom in the room that can be applied to current fights. And I also feel like there is a lot of wisdom and experience from the organizing world that can be brought to PEG. You know, the same way we're talking about how do you map out all these state officials and government players, you might not naturally think that community organizers or social justice groups have a familiarity with public utilities commissions, and they might not on a media piece, but they might when it comes to immigration. You know, folks who are working on the Farm Bill might not seem like natural allies, but when you understand that the broadband is bound up for rural communities in the Farm Bill, it's a natural alliance. Folks who are working on STEM, who are working on math and sciences, have a lot to say about community media access. People who are doing with secondary education. All of these places, I think, are places that we need to now start seeing as natural allies that we need to bring under the tent, rather than seeing those are folks who are working in immigration or education or housing. That is true, but the backbone that lies behind all of these fights is one that has to do with communications infrastructure.
All right. So last question. As we're running out of time, we've lost a few people to the airport, including one of our panelists. Often when we talk about media policy, and one thing I love about this group is that people here are definitely talking about media policy, often at a very specific and granular level. But sometimes the recommendations, they're tentative, they're incremental. You know, that great FCC report, probably the most beautifully written government document ever. When they got to the recommendations, it got a little mushy. There was a lot of stuff that other people could do. So what I want to hear from you, and maybe I've got one of my own, is in one or two sentences at most, you know, what's that big game-changing idea? What's the thing? Let's kind of put aside the political realities and who's going to win in November. What's the one thing that you think could happen that would really transform things?
You first. Oh, the pressure. Okay, one sentence. It's time to transition to like really robust and multi-purpose community technology centers in every community. Community owned and operated, running everything from radio, broadband to television, digital literacy, digital education, content production, organizing.
Ditto. I agree 100% with that, and I think that if there's anything that comes out of the experiences from the people in this room is that you know, there was a lot of recommendations in that report, but there's a lot of opportunity there, and they didn't make any firm recommendations. That's up to us. We can take those bullets, well, they were recommendations, but they had no teeth. So let's take those and give them teeth.
All right, good answer. So mine, I said at the beginning that it wasn't about money, but I was kind of lying. So look, we spend $1.50 per capita maybe on public media and not really community media in terms of federal support. That is far, far below what the rest of the world spends. It's $80 in England, it's $20 in Canada, it's far more in Scandinavia. If we spent $5 per capita per person on public and community media, we could completely transform the system. That should be very doable. The money is out there, and a good, healthy chunk of that money should go to the community access, the community media center community, and I'll frankly be happy when that just no longer sounds like a crazy idea, and I think that'll be progress. Thanks a lot for listening. Appreciate your time.
No ACM conference would be complete without a few remarks from our favorite DC insider, Jerry Lederer. Jerry serves as our go-to person in Washington, D.C. when we need to drill down and really push the envelope. Jerry is an attorney with the law firm of Best, & Krieger. He has served as Executive Director of Advocacy and Research Advancement for the Building Owners and Managers Association International, Executive Director of Government Affairs for the United States Telephone Association, and General Counsel of the United States Conference of Mayors. Please welcome Jerry Lederer.
Ross, if there was a single message you wanted to deliver today, what would it be? I won't pay. That's what you do without ACM. You're a single voice, an articulate voice, a powerful voice, but you're not really heard. Let me give you an example. You heard the terrific work from the folks from Manhattan. You go to the next borough over, the Bronx, right? Max, I don't know if Max is here or not. No. What a great job the Bronx Network does to bring us congressmen, you know, their whole congressional delegation, right? And so, if I could, let me borrow that table back there. What's your message? Right. So it's gotten a little stronger. They're talking as a community, right? But I'm sorry, there's 30 tables here. That's 1 out of 30 tables. That's 1 out of 30 tables. And so I heard the message delivered at the last panel that what we really need to do is to map, to match, and to localize. Again, that's a great message. But if you don't have ACM to coordinate it, it's going to be an awful lot of frustration. And I think that's where you are right now. ACM has not really been able to do the inventorying, the coordination, the orchestration that you need if community media is going to be really protected and preserved. Map, match, and localize. I think the other thing that you've heard a couple times today is that you've got a really powerful ability to deliver a message. Right? I mean, real simple idea here is that you need to inventory your assets. I mean, you've got a campaign coming up, you've got people that are going to want to come to your studio, you've got people that are using your studio. How are you turning all those assets into allies? You heard from the public interest group, oh my goodness, we had this message to deliver. How are we going to do it? Public access. Public access. Again, inventorying your assets. I really can't say it strong enough to you that one of your largest assets is ACM. And the question is, how long can you continue to count ACM as being in your inventory of assets, unless you support it? I guess the last thing I'd like to mention, and again, I'm not trying to be critical at all of the last panel, but the last panel, the biggest applause line they got was, so what is it that we need for the future? You know, and the answer was, we need a multimedia technology center in every community. We already have it. Just haven't called it. How many people have gotten their first exposure to the internet, to web page development, to messaging at their local access community center? Maybe we didn't call it the right thing. So sometimes it seems to me the message is really very simple. And that is, yeah, we want to grow for the future, but if we lose the foundation that we have now, I'm not sure how you get there. And so, if you just try to keep those messages in mind, inventorying assets, very good. So if you just keep those in mind, it'll work. Next couple years are going to be important. Again, you've heard the foundation, you've heard the rumblings all along that they do have to redefine terms. They have to rewrite the act. I don't know if it happens in the next Congress, but the debate and the foundation will be laid in the next Congress. The challenge to you all is, will community media be at that table for that discussion? I hope that you will. I'd like to help in any way that I can, but you need to inventory your assets, and the assets are rather low now. Thank you very much.
So while I'm not going to ask you for money, what I am going to do is I'm going to tell you that the work that we do, it matters. But I don't have to tell you that. You know that. You know that because we put communications tools in the hands of people. We are media educators. You know that because of us, there's greater transparency in government. We're part of our local emergency planning committees and operations centers. You know because that shy kid who doesn't have a lot of friends, who comes to your center and learns how to use the equipment is a hometown hero, because he goes around town with his camera and produces programs of relevance to your communities and asks questions and talks about issues important to youth. And then he goes away to college and he's got skills because we gave him those skills and her those skills. You know because on our channels you can watch religious services, high school sports, concerts, talk shows, homework hotline, and see and hear from people who look like you and people who don't look like you or sound like you, and you can learn about them. You know because on our local channels, anyone can be an agent for change, for social justice, a bridge builder, an educator, an entertainer, and a storyteller. We matter because we are relevant, growing as anchor institutions that offer resources and services that facilitate the communication needs of our communities. The work we do in our communities matter, and the work that we do in the Alliance matters. It would be very easy to go home, hunker down, and forget about what we've learned this week and the work that we still need to do together. There is work to do to ensure the sustainability, the continuity, and dare I even say, the growth of community media across this country. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be here this week, that have the resources to be able to be here, we have a responsibility to work to strengthen access across this country, and that work happens at its heart through the Alliance. So as we leave here, I send you home with a challenge. I ask you again, and I think I asked you this last year, to do one thing. One thing. Participate in one committee, either on a chapter, region, or national level. Attend one public policy call this year. Attend one member call this year. Foster greater awareness of your own communities by what you learned here this week, because you know that what we do matters. We are a 20-member board of directors on the national board, and we have just over 2 full-time staff. We cannot do it alone. Last night you heard from youth who are stepping up, and now we need to build an army. We have done this before. We can be fearless, relentless, determined, loud, because what we do matters. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our tremendous panel who was here today, all of our speakers, our sponsors, our exhibitors, our conference committee. I think my staff left, but I hope some of them are up. No, some of my staff's here. I want to thank my staff and my board of directors at Falmouth Community Television who do the work that they do so that I can do this work. I want to thank my board of directors as well. I want to thank our ACM staff, Catrice, Tricia, Hector, Greg, and Sylvia Strobel, our executive director. You know, this week may be coming to an end, but our work is not coming to an end. I am counting on each and every one of you. I am holding you responsible for how we go forward. I'm asking you to be a part of this army. Ooh. Oh, that was pretty bad. I can pause. I know technology. I work at an access center. So thank you again. Thank you to our exhibitors, our sponsors, everyone. I'd like to ask Jay Robertson to come up. I'd also like to invite everyone from our California delegation to come up as we close out our ceremony. Thank you all for being here. Go home, be an army for change. Do it for the Alliance, do it for your communities. Thank you.
My best here.
It is that time where we will pass the drum to the next hosting city. Prior to doing that, I do have a special message from everybody in Hawaii, and of course, deference to a great spiritual leader in the islands, Monsignor Frank de Lima. But I do want to share with you, O Kaumali'i I Kohio, Kona o Kahului, e Kalakaua I Haleakala, Lili o Kalani e Kalakaua, ke Kapiolani Lunalilo Nanakuli, o Lelo Akaku ho Ike I Naleo, Kapupae Aina, Nalu o Kaho Aloha. And with that, we add all of your spirit, your energy, and every bit of wisdom that we have collected throughout this short, brief period of time here in the lovely city of Chicago. It is now contained in this wonderful pahu. I told you earlier at the opening ceremonies what Ia'i Kaleo meant and what it offers to this organization. So at this time, I believe if Barbara is here, we would like to anyway have Chicago pass on to the delegation in California, and we certainly want to invite everybody to join us when they open up those Golden Gates. If they still have money for the Golden Gates in California. Yeah, if you could. And we will see everybody in San Francisco in May.